going on, everybody? See who's in the chat. We got Mr. Gerhard. What's up, sir? How are you? Let's do this thing. Frankie from Florida. Salute. What's up, buddy? So here we are. Bear, welcome. Good to have you again. Thank you so much for scheduling this to share your knowledge and educate us all on this situation about taxes and who may or may not owe federal income tax. So would you like to introduce yourself to the people who don't know you?
Sure. So first of all, thanks very much for having me. And as far as the introduction, it's pretty simple. I've been studying the tax laws for a while, and we're just trying to figure out the obvious paradox, that you cannot be deprived of life, liberty, and property without due process of law, and nor shall private property be taken without just compensation. So how do they take the money out of your paycheck? And once we figure out that paradox, and once we understand the reasons why the tax laws exist, and furthermore, why it's good for us that these tax laws exist, then we're free. We become free through knowledge. And this is what I like to tell my people, whoever's listening. Let us not struggle against the system. Let us make the system work the way it was intended to work, to free ourselves, right? And once we figure out how it was intended to work, it naturally occurs that we become free. So those of you who are looking to exit the federal income tax, you've come to the right place. I just say. Go ahead,
So
Frank.
are you telling me that the Constitution didn't fail?
Absolutely not. No, not at all. No, it works like a charm. It works perfectly, but you have to understand how it works in order to obtain the freedom that it secures for you.
Correct. I agree here. So let's jump right in. What is the federal income tax, sir?
Yeah. So that's a big question, right? What is the federal income tax? And remember, there are three words: federal income tax, right? That's like saying, what is a Japanese car mechanic, right? Is he a Japanese mechanic who works on cars? Or is he a mechanic who works on Japanese cars?
It's a good question.
Yeah, in other words, is the federal income tax the federal power to tax your income? Or is it the federal, the tax on federal income, which is a benefit of the federal government? Right.
And so, expound or unpack that for us if you can. The difference between the federal tax on income or the tax on federal income.
Yeah. So the federal tax on income would imply that it's the federal power to reach into your pocket and tax your earnings. Whereas the tax on federal income means it's the federal power to tax a federal benefit that you received. For example, if you were working for the federal government, say you're a postal delivery man, and you get, say, I don't know what they make. Let's say you get $100,000 a year, right? Well, the federal income is merely a tax. Rather, the federal income tax is merely a tax on that federal income you received. So you end up giving them.
So, what would be an example of what would be a job that would be taxable or considered as federal income? What are some examples?
So, anything that involves a service, okay, and by service I mean government service. So
that's a legally defined term, correct? Service.
Absolutely. It's a legally actionable term. It's not actually defined, though, and we'll get into that in a second here.
It's not federally defined?
It's not federally defined, but it certainly has federal meanings. Okay.
Defined in the state. I know that because they tried to tell me that I was DHHS said I was providing services and I was not, and I thought that. Yes.
Okay. So give me 1 second. Let me look up my notes here. So, for example, I'll give you some services, right? We all know the armed service is a service. We all know that the postal service is a service. How about the secret service?
So hold on.
Yeah.
So somebody who's in the military, they get their wages,
Right.
right?
Absolutely.
And those wages are taxable.
You bet. They're for service, aren't they?
Correct.
They did a government service, right? For example, secret service, marshal service, housing service, national ocean service, national weather service, economic research service, postal inspection service, food and nutrition services, federal protective services, national park service. Did you work for a service? And if you work for a service, then you got paid for your services, and that pay is called wages, and wages are taxable, right?
And so the confusing thing to me here is how, how would they pay anybody to begin with if they weren't, taking people's money illegally or unlawfully, unjustly for taxes that they do not owe for services that they did not provide because they did not
So
get wages.
yeah, so that's a fraud, right? Because that's obviously untrue. So you got to ask yourself, who is perpetrating that fraud? Well, it's whoever that you work for, who is not a government authority, who's writing that W-2 at the end of the year or a 1099 at the end of the year, and they're claiming that you performed services, and they're claiming you gave them or they gave you remuneration for services. And further, they're claiming that they're either a service recipient, which is one who receives services, which is the government, or they're claiming that they're an employer, which if you go to the IRC, the Internal Revenue Code, in section 3401, an employer is one who hires an employee. But then an employee is an elected official, an officer, or an employee of the government, or an officer of a corporation. So those persons, those alleged employers, pretend that you're an employee, and they pretend to give you wages, which are defined as remuneration for services, and you pretend to accept those terms by not properly refuting the false presumption that it is established.
Well,
And
there's no pretend if you're paying your taxes, right? You're agreeing to those terms. You're consenting
yeah,
to
correct.
fraud.
You're consenting to fraud by failing to object, right? And
Yes. So that's what I was going to. So what would people do who are getting their wages or their money taken off each check each week? And what do they do? Who do they go to? Human resources, their boss. What do
yeah.
they say?
So first of all, you'd look up the W-4, which every quote unquote employer gives you, right, to sign before you get into your job. They give you a W-4. And usually they give you only the first page because they just print it off their printers, and that's it. They only need the signatures on the first page. But if you look up the W-4 online, you'll notice that it's more than one page. There are maybe like several pages. And so read the directions very carefully for the exemption part and follow that direction very, very carefully. And where it says write exempt in the blank space after whatever line 7 or whatever it is, do that. Do that, and then give that to HR, and that will be evidence that last year's pay was not taxable and this year's pay is not taxable. And HR is supposed to stop withholding, right? That's the first
Okay.
step if you're doing a wage type job, and I mean wage in the common sense of a 9 to 5 work. All right. So before you get your paycheck, they give you a W-4. Make sure you fill it out and write exempt on that, because that's actually almost right. I would personally write not applicable and exempt, because the whole thing doesn't apply to you. And the legal term for that is non-assumpsit. So you could write like 2 phrases there: exempt, comma, non-assumpsit. Non-assumpsit means you're not going into a contract based on those terms. That's the first thing you would do if you
How
were
do you
to
spell that? Non-assumptive? Non-assumptive? Like assumption?
non-assumpsit. Assumpsit. Um, yeah, like assumption, but it's assumpsit. Okay. That's what I would do. Now that's for a wage job. If you were gonna do a 1099 job, like a lot of people
Mm-hmm.
do with construction and so forth, um, what they will send you, I believe, is a W-9. Correct me if I'm wrong. I'm pretty sure it is. They'll give you a W-9, and in that W-9, they will ask you to indicate whether you're a corporation or individual or sole proprietor and whatever. And then they'll also ask you a few questions about, where you live and all that stuff. On that form, before you sign that form, I would give another form to the person who hires you for that job. And on that form, I would ask 2 questions. The first question is, are you a government agent, comma, instrumentality, or unit? In other words, are you, the man who's hiring me, a government, instrumentality, agent, or unit? And those words come from 26 USC 6041A. So look that up, 26 USC 6041A. And the word to look up is the word person. Okay? A person is considered a service recipient if he is any governmental unit, agency, or instrumentality. All right,
Is
look that
that
up.
is that linked? I did link the show prep.
Yeah,
It's there if anyone wants to check it out. You can see all the questions that we plan on asking and all his answers with hyperlinks in the
yeah,
document to a
it
lot of
is.
this stuff. It is
It's
in there.
yeah, it's number 15. If you hit that, it'll link it right there, and I'll read it to you.
All right.
Person regarding payments of remuneration for services. Remember, we already understand what the word services mean, right?
Mm-hmm.
Persons for payments of services. So a service recipient is one who is engaged in a trade or business. By the way, trade or business means the functions of the performance of a public office. So you don't have a trade or business. What you do is work and labor, right? That's all you do. You don't do a service. You don't use any fancy words. The reason you don't use any fancy words is, remember what Jesus said. He said, "No one will get into the kingdom of heaven unless they are as innocent as children." Right? Don't use the words given to you by the scribes and Pharisees. Use the words that you knew when you were 6 years old. Mom, dad goes to work. They didn't go to employment to get remuneration for services. They went to work to get paid so you can make a living. Correct?
Mm-hmm.
And so, by the way, such person, if you look it up, pulling it up, person includes any government unit, any instrumentality or agency thereof, or something like that. That's what it says. So that's the first question you want to ask them. Am I a government unit, agency, or instrumentality? Or excuse me, are you? Are you the person
Are
who's
you? Yep.
hiring me? And then the second thing you want to ask them is, am I being called on to perform a government service? So those are the 2 questions that you want to ask your
What about
person,
wages? Do you want to ask them, am I receiving, or, they probably would, I guess that gets out of the
wages
bounds.
is for wage paying jobs that are under the W-2 form. We're talking
Oh,
about
okay.
contracting under the 1099s. So if you're going to contract with someone, then you want to write down, you want to fill out a W-9. And before you fill out that W-9, you want to ask the person who's hiring you for that job. You want to ask them, are they, a government unit, any agency or instrumentality thereof, according to what I wrote there, and according to what's in the paper. And then also, am I performing a government service? And if the question to those is no, then great. You're not subject to the federal income tax or the tax on federal income. And you keep that in your documents and you save that for later. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how I would begin the process of the exit, the exodus from wage slavery, right? So properly fill out a W-2 form and properly fill out a W-9 form, preceded by those two questions to the person who hires you for the job. Okay. So
Yep.
there you go. What's next?
Okay, great.
So yeah.
Next,
Yeah.
what is it?
So let's just make sure everybody understands that federal income tax should be properly called the tax on federal income. So from now on, let's just call it that, because when we call it that, it becomes harder for them to refute the issue. It puts the presumption against them, and it puts the burden of proof for them to prove that it is not anything other than a tax on federal income. So using your
Right.
words, never call it again the federal income tax, just call it the tax on federal income. Okay?
TOFI, TOFI.
TOFI, we'll call it.
The tax.
Yeah.
TOFI, not tofu, not to be confused with tofu.
Right.
So, what are the origins of TOFI, the tax on federal income?
Yeah. So it was basically a tax on the United States instrumentalities and employees and the privileges of using or incorporation for under the United States. And it was originally signed into law by Abe Lincoln to fight to fund the Civil War. And up to about probably the 19 teens, probably 1920s even, people were well aware that the federal income tax was merely the tax on federal income. And nobody paid a federal tax on income unless they knew that they had to pay it and it was clear to them that they received federal income. So, but after World War One, that started to change, or about the time of World War One, that started to change, because then this huge patriotic fever grips the nation, and everybody has to put in their share, and the taxes were considered a part of it, right? So we went down that slippery slope of obscuring the truth of what the tax on federal income really was, and then it really got real, so to speak, in World War II. Now, remember, in World War II, everybody went to war, and everybody did what on the home front? We went to the factories. Right, I wasn't there, but
Yeah.
you can imagine. We can imagine. We went to the factories. Rosie the Riveter went to the factories. Um, they they built stuff for government contracts in order to supply the war effort. So guess what?
So
Everybody was
everybody
receiving.
owed taxes.
Everybody
Everybody
owes
was
taxes.
receiving wages.
Right. So everybody essentially worked for the government, and all the companies worked for the government, right? And so what happened to all the companies who did contracting jobs? They got W-9s, they got 1099, and what did they do with that money? They passed that down to whoever it is that was working for them. Same thing as the corporations. Everybody started passing out W-2s and 1099s around the time of World War II. And after 4 years of war, do you think they forgot about? I mean, do you think they they said, okay, well, the war is over, so we don't have to do this anymore. No, they didn't, right? They just kept on doing it. They just kept on doing it because there was money coming in for the government, and they loved it, and they kept on implementing that. I remember the GI Bill. Well, a lot of people got trained to be lawyers and accountants. And what do you think those lawyers and accountants were taught? Government procedure, correct? And so that
Right.
is how the rest of America, around the time of World War II, started to be on the hook for these fraudulent or at least erroneously issued 1099s and W-2s. And that's where we are. That's what we are at today. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. And so obviously after the war, people, so I'm assuming, so these businesses, everybody was just started handing these things out.
Yeah.
That's where did that piece come in?
Say again. Why did everybody keep handing it out?
So well, yeah, it's like people were paying, they owed taxes because they were getting government, they were providing a service, they were getting wages.
Yeah.
And so then let's say there's a supermarket and somebody gets a job at the supermarket. Now, how did they start putting out these W-4s to their workers who are not
Yeah.
actually employees, they're workers, right?
So it's a matter of time and pressure and poor information, lack of information, disinformation. It didn't happen overnight. And a lot of people,
And it was what about patriotism? Isn't part of it?
oh, sure it was. Think about the men who died fighting wars. Do you think they were weak men? No, of course not, right? These were
No.
ballsy men who fought and died for their country. And the reason they fought and died for the country from the perspective of those who sent them there is so that they don't cause trouble for them. That's why we have wars. We have wars to neuter our population. And that's why people like, people who have gone to war, people who are veterans, they're automatically on the I don't know, the FBI warning list or something. Veterans are considered dangerous. They're not dangerous because they're going to rob you. They're dangerous because they're going to tell you the truth.
All right. And so what did the early tax returns say?
Well, I don't know what the early tax attorneys say, but
No, tax returns, tax returns.
oh, the tax returns. Okay, yeah. So
Yes, yeah.
the earliest tax return, which you can find, it's linked. It says this tax is imposed under the excise laws of the United States, right? So that's a key statement. Those taxes are considered under the excise laws of the United States. So people ought to know what excise means. Excise means to cut, right? For example, an
What is
excision
it?
means to cut. Means
Okay.
to cut, right? So excise means to cut. For example, an excise, an excision biopsy. That means a biopsy of your skin or whatever by excision, by cutting, right?
Taking a piece of. Taking a piece
Taking
of.
a piece out. For example, um, when a surgeon goes in and excises one's appendix, it's called an appendectomy. To excise an appendix, right? That's a very common procedure done every day across the nation. Excise means to cut, and a cut is what you pay for after you receive a benefit. For example, it's a cut of the action, right?
Right. Well,
When
I was
you're
gonna say it's what you pay to the fucking mafia,
exactly,
for extortion.
it
You pay
is.
them a cut.
It's a cut.
You
It's a
know.
cut of the action. It's the cut of the benefits from the United States, right? So that's how it works.
So who's liable for an excise tax?
So the excise tax is paid by those who received the benefit. Right? You can't excise something that's not there. For example, the term taxpayer, that means a person subject to any internal revenue tax. That's the definition of a taxpayer. Now, if you think about that statement, a taxpayer is someone who's subject to any portion of the internal revenue tax. That sounds like circular logic, doesn't it? In fact, it's called a
Yes.
tautology. It's called a tautology. It's circular logic, and it doesn't
Mhm.
make any sense. But it does make sense if you switch the perspective in which you're looking at this. If you're looking at this problem from your own perspective, you're saying to yourself, well, how can I be a taxpayer? How would I know if I am a taxpayer if no one's telling me that I'm subject to any part of the internal revenue tax? That doesn't make any sense, does it? But if you stand from the position of a third party looking in, a person is subject to the internal revenue tax when somebody points the finger at him and says, this guy is subject to the internal revenue tax. And that is the person you work for. It's that third person who's bearing false witness against you or against the people who works for them, right? And when they do that,
Yeah. So your boss is
right,
not an employer because he's only an employer if you're providing a service, right?
if he's the government, right,
Or you're receiving wages for services provided, and sorry, I keep hearing this fucking big bang, and I don't know what the hell it is. It's
well,
distracting me.
is it raining? I mean, it's raining here. It's some noise on my rooftop. Is that what it is?
Oh yeah, but no, there's some renovations going down and all that, but I don't know what the hell. It's just like this weird big bang. I don't know what it is, but anyways,
Yeah,
it is what it is.
yeah,
So Um, so if you work for Walmart or some other private company, um, then you don't owe any tax on federal income simply because you don't receive federal income.
correct.
Correct?
Absolutely correct. That is until Walmart bears false witness against you and claims that you've received remuneration for services, which you did not. Okay, and
Right.
that's
And so
something they do against you.
that answers my next question, which is why do people think they owe it? And it's because their their boss, the company that they work for tells them, and they just say, here, fill this out. You need to fill this out. But they don't tell you how to fill it out correctly.
Right, because they don't know themselves. That's another thing, right? They just assume to do it because everybody else does it, and it's been what, like 80 years since everybody's been doing it since World War II, right?
Right.
So unfortunately, they weren't around before the time of the W-2, and their grandparents or great grandparents didn't tell them how it was back in the day, and they don't know any better, unfortunately.
All
Um,
right. And so, what about these legal terms of art? What are legal? Tell us about legal terms of art.
yeah, so legalese is what it is, and it's basically what Jesus would have said about the scribes and Pharisees. They create custom definitions and terms of art that matches their agenda. For example, wages. Wages mean remuneration for service. And right now, if you've watched the previous part of this video in the last 29 minutes, you would know that remuneration for service means the money that you receive from the government service you performed. But they call it wages, and wages is a ubiquitous word that's used everywhere, right? And so if you don't challenge the fact that you didn't receive wages, then it's presumed that you did, and you're presumed
Right.
therefore to be subject to the tax. And that word wages is therefore a legalese term. It's a term of art. Another term of art may be is another term of art is trade or business. I could go up to anybody in the street and say, "Hey, what's your trade or business?" And chances are that they will have no problem thinking that they understand what I'm saying, and they'll say, "Oh yeah, I'm a carpenter. Oh yeah, I'm an electrician. Oh yeah, I'm a dentist. Whatever it is." They'll have no problem explaining to me what they do for a living. But they don't realize that the trade or business means the performance of the functions of a public office. And again, those are linked terms. Section 7701 in the Internal Revenue Code. So if you consent to having a trade or business, what have you consented to? You've been performing.
Paying the tax.
Well, yeah. Ultimately, you
You
consent
consented to that you owe money.
that you performed the
Services.
functions of a public office. And what do people who perform the functions of a public office receive? They receive compensation for their services, right? And how do we know that? We know that by reading the Constitution, where Article 1 says congressmen and representatives shall be paid for their services. We know that from Article 2, says the president shall be paid for his services. We know that from Article 3, right? The judges of the Supreme Court and lower courts shall be paid for their services. So if you have a trade or business, which is the performance of the functions of a public office, what did you get? You got paid for your services, right? You run a public office, of course you're supposed to pay the federal income tax, right?
Right.
Yeah, before we go on, I was reminded to state one other thing, which is about incorporation. Remember the definition of an employee? It is an employee, elected official, or an officer of the United States, and a officer of a corporation. Now, why do you think that's the case? Why do you think officers of the corporation are also considered statutory employees? It's because corporations are not a right. Corporations is a privilege granted by government. And if you are an officer of a corporation, you are exercising a privilege granted by government. Those privileges include limited liability, trademark protection, and perpetual existence as a corporation. So a lot of people out there who are in the trades, they like to incorporate so they can quote unquote save on taxes. And in some regards that may be true because they can deduct a lot of stuff, and that's true. However, that also means that you have to spend about half an hour every night collecting your receipts and tabulating all your expenditures and so forth. Right? It's a pain in the ass. I've done it myself, so I don't do that anymore. So incorporating does have value, but earning money through a corporation means you're exercising a privilege of government under which you are completely taxable. So if the idea is to just walk away from taxes, one of the stupidest things to do is to incorporate. Although, like I said, incorporation does serve its function for other uses, which is beyond the scope of this discussion right now. Yeah.
Right.
Okay. Now that we got that.
Yeah. So interesting. So you gave us some examples of the legalese, right?
Yeah.
Do you have any other important examples of these legal terms of art that people should understand?
Yeah, actually, there's a few, and that's again under number 15. You must understand if you want to do this, all right. If you want to actually escape the matrix you're in, you have to understand these words, and the words are as follows: gross income. Whenever you hear the word gross income, you equate that with federal income or government income. Wherever you see that word gross anywhere on a tax form, on a financial statement on wherever it is that has any relationship with government, gross income or gross weekly income or gross monthly income means federal income, government income, income from some sort of a government source. Okay. The next word is wages. Okay, go ahead. You had a question.
Yeah, I have a question. So it's in regard to like credit cards and when you're asked questions about how much income do you have and things like that. So how do you answer those questions with a credit card? I don't know if you have any
Yeah.
or
So when a credit card company issues credit, that's a private issue, right? It's a private matter. You can call it your income whatever you like. It shouldn't bear on your ability to get income or to get credit rather. What I'm referring to as far as gross income is, for example, if someone's asking you uh, as a matter of liability, as a matter of taxation, how much was your gross income? The correct answer is zero. I mean, if you talk to a private
right.
party who's asking you how much money do you make in a year so I can give you a loan on your house or something, then you would just say, I make whatever money I make, and that's a private issue. There's a difference between the private income, if you want to call it that, and the public income or gross income or federal income that we're speaking of. One is a liability, and the other one is just what you receive. Right? It's a liability, but it's also a benefit.
Right.
So
So what I guess I'd have to go down to the bank and ask them and try to but because they will say could a person could claim like that who is paying taxes, whether it's rightful or wrongful or necessary or unnecessary. Um, when I claim zero, then when I go to get a loan, it's going to be reported that I didn't make any money. And so, how do I prove my income to them? To that, so it's basically impossible to get a
well,
loan. As far as I don't know.
well, the last time I tried to get a loan, I couldn't get one because I told them that my gross income was zero. Right now, had I changed that number, I might have been able to get one. But the point is, I'm not sure. Um, I'm not sure if this is something that it's complete. Well, first of all, it's not exactly relevant to how to get out of the system. This is more of a tangential
Correct. No, no, no. I'm
thing.
just curious.
Yeah,
These
yeah,
are just things to
right,
like
right,
think about.
right, right. But to make a long story short, um, gross income means federal income. That's it. Okay. Wherever you see the word gross, it means related with federal. The second word that you have to know is wages. Wages mean remuneration for government services. If you didn't perform a government service, you never got wages. The third word you got to know is employee. You're not an employee unless you're an officer, an elected official, or an employee of the United States, or if you are an officer of a corporation. Okay.
Can we put together a like a decision tree type thing with all this stuff?
Oh yeah, sure. Once
Can we,
you, well, but you have
can
to
we
know the
work on
term.
that?
You have to know the terms first, and that's what we're going over right now.
Right, right. So we
And
could turn this into like a decision tree document for people to be like, ask this, it asks you a question. Did you do this? Did you do no? And then
right,
it kind of breaks it all down
right.
systematically.
We could do that. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Like a little
Okay.
flow chart. Yeah, I understand.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Um,
So, and then we have another comment here from a friend of mine, Donna Judge. She says, ironically, the money I'm paid by town hall to perform services as an elected supervisor of the voter checklist is my only income that's not taxed.
that okay. So there's a difference between getting taxed and being subject to the tax. Being subject to the tax means you have to follow all these laws and procedures. But if you follow these laws and procedures, there are things that are not taxed. For example, A welfare check is not taxed, but it's government income, right? Veterans benefits are generally not taxed. Again, it's government income. So those are what we call exempted uh, things that are not taxed. On the other hand, there's people like you and I who are not subject in any way. So that's why in the intro, when we talked about the W-2, writing down the word exempt, means you're statutorily exempt from the things you made, but you're still subject to the statute. Writing down the word not applicable or non-assumptive means that none of this shit even applies to you at all. See what I mean? So in your friend's case, her income is indeed income because it comes from the government. Her income is indeed taxable, even though, according to their rules, the tax is zero. You see what I mean? Whereas
Right.
your money and my money, that I don't make any money, but let's say if I labored and made money or whatnot, that's completely beyond the scope of the Internal Revenue tax. Is that clear? So employee is a government employee. What do you think an employer must mean? Well, an employer is one who hires an employee. So an employer is by definition the government. And then what's a service recipient, right? A service recipient is one who receives services. And we already know that the word service means government service. So the service recipient is by definition a government unit, agency, or instrumentality, right? Trade or business means the performance of the functions of a public office. And then here it goes, section 1402, self-employment income and net earnings from self-employment. Those are equal to gross income from a trade or business, which is equal to government pay for government services. So those of you out there who say, oh, this doesn't apply to me because I'm self-employed. The moment you say you're self-employed, you're saying you have self-employment income. What you're doing is you're saying you're self-employed for the government. And so those people who are, I know you're out there. I mean, all these people, I've been talking to a lot of people over the years. They're like a contractor or whatnot, and say, I don't have to worry about this. I'm self-employed. Yeah, when you think that way, you're self-employed. You think you're self-employed. The government thinks you're self-employed for them. And so there's no substitute for knowledge. There's no substitute for diligence. Read the code and understand every bit of it. But I can tell you this: the IRS code is about 3.8 million words long, and if you were to read that, you wouldn't have a life, right? You would be dead reading that. And of course, I didn't read the whole thing. I won't even come close to claiming that. I did not read anywhere close to the whole thing. But what I did was I figured out that the Internal Revenue Code, the entire Internal Revenue Code, in so much as taxation of property and wages and so forth, excluding the National Firearms Act, okay? I'm not talking about firearms. That's a different section of the Internal Revenue Code. But excluding the guns and the firearms and things like that, there are 4 words on which the Internal Revenue Code is based on. And these 4 words you must know by heart. Okay? And the first word is property. When we talk about property, it means government property. It means property belonging to the United States under Section 4, under Article 4, Section 3, Clause 2, where Congress has the power to impose any rules or regulations respecting its territory or other property belonging to the United States. So wherever you see the word property in the United States code or in government writings and so forth, that means property belonging to the United States, and it is completely different and excludes life, liberty, and property and private property secured by the Fifth Amendment. Okay? So that's the first word you got to know. The second word you got to know is the word income. Income means one of two things: federal income or corporate income. It does not mean everything that comes in. Okay? Income is the same as used in the Corporate Income Tax Act of 1909. That's the 16th Amendment income. And the case for that is Bowers versus Kerbal Inc. No, Kerbal Empire Company. And that's 271 US 170 from 1926. And it also refers to several other cases. But income means corporate income. Gross income means government income. Any income they talk about means income which was obtained or derived from a government privilege, whether that be employment or incorporation. It does not mean
You're right, like the LLC. So if you become an LLC, then now you technically
you got income.
you're saying my business is part of the government now.
Well, no, you're not saying that. What you're saying is I'm exercising a privilege under the government. That privilege being limited liability, right? You get an
Right.
LLC. That's what it stands for, limited liability corporation. So you're exercising limited liability. You're getting the privilege of a trademark protection, right? Again, no one can copy your company name and post it on their truck or whatever, right? And you're also getting an LLC in order to have perpetual existence of a corporation, corpus, right? Body. So when you pass away, you could sign it over to your kids or whatever. It doesn't matter. Anybody can hop on and be the CEO of your corporation, right? They can't do that for your body. Only God can put a soul in your body, right? So again, there's God, right? God, the Almighty Creator, and then there's government. God gives you everything. Government gives you the pretend of everything. God gives you life, but there's a finite amount of it. The government gives you unlimited life in the form of a corporation. God said you have to be responsible for what you do. And if you screw up, you got to make amends and compensate for your wrongs, right? If I bump into you and, I don't know, smash your pumpkin, I owe you a pumpkin, right? But if I'm a corporation, hey, I've got government limited liability. I got a name from my parents, but I can have any name I want through the government. See what I mean? So if you don't exercise your rights under God, you end up exercising a privilege under the control of government, and you become subject to their laws and their regulations and their statutes and their taxes and their excises. That's how it all works, right? So that's the word income. Now the next word is the word services, which we've talked about quite a bit now. You must understand that wherever it's used in the tax code, the word service means government service, nothing else. What you do is labor. A man labors, and I'm going to read you a Butchers Union versus Crescent City because I think it's one of the most elegantly written pieces of literature regarding our labor. And this is by the way, it's quoted from Adam Smith's Wealth of Nations. The property which every man has in his own labor, as it is the original foundation of all other property, so it is the most sacred and inviolable. The patrimony of the poor man lies in the strength and dexterity of his own hands, and to hinder his employing his strength and dexterity in a manner which he thinks is proper without injury to his neighbor is a plain violation of this most sacred property. We created the government to serve us. We didn't create the government to violate our most sacred property, right? It doesn't even make sense that the 16th Amendment somehow authorized a tax on our own on our labor. And again, it comes from the fact that our government is a government of delegated powers. I have the power to delegate my rights and powers to the government to serve me. All right? If somebody walking down the street is getting robbed, do you have the right to beat up the robber to defend him? Absolutely, 100%. Do you have the right to delegate that power to the government? Absolutely, 100%. In fact, that's why the government exists. It's to serve and to protect us, right? Let me ask you the opposite of that little question. Do I have the right to put my hands in someone's pocket and rob from them and steal from them? Absolutely not, right?
No, you might have the power or ability to do it.
I may have the power to do it, but I don't have the authority to do it, right? I may have the
Correct.
strength to do it, but I'm not allowed to do it. That's a wrong. Everybody knows that's wrong. So if I don't have the power to put my hand in your pocket and steal from you, how about me and three of my friends? Can we do that? I mean, we all have the power, but do we have the authority? We don't, right? How about 10 of my friends? How about 100 of my friends? You see what I mean? So that's a power that I don't have. And if I don't have that power, guess who else doesn't have that power? Government.
The government.
Government doesn't have that power because I couldn't delegate my power to the government that I didn't have. See what I mean?
Right.
So anyway, so that covers some ground. And the last word that you have to know is the word sources or source, right?
Source of income.
Source of income. Now, if you look at section 61, it'll tell you gross income means all income from whatever source derived. And the 16th Amendment also says Congress has the power to tax income from whatever source derived. Now, why do they hide the definition of the word source? Because that's the key word. That word, in fact, is the most important word of all, because the word source means the source of government revenue. And the way we know that is we look at the constitutions established before the 16th Amendment. And by that, I mean the state constitution, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, Pennsylvania, Georgia, and so forth. Go to those constitutions, right? And there are others of the original 13. Go to those constitutions and do a word search for the word source. And what you'll find is the word source means source of government revenue, source of taxation. Source means government sources, not your sources, not private sources, not nothing that belongs to you. Source is something that is a government property. And if you have a source from which you derive income, don't you think you ought to pay a little bit of tax on that? Absolutely, because that's a government privilege, and you must pay your tax that you derive, or rather, the income that you derive from your sources. Now, here's another place that you might want to go to. I want you to go to Google, right, and type in Google government revenue, United States Treasury, and it'll pull you up to a site that talks about the finances, about government finances, and it's going to use the word source a number of times, like 20 times. And I want you to read every time where the word source is used. And you will see that the modern use of the word source means government sources, which is completely compatible with how the word source is used back when the country was first founded. All right. And you're saying, well, somebody might say, well, it's not in the United States Constitution. So how do you know that's what the United States Constitution meant? Well, my answer to that is because the United States Constitution and the power of the United States is delegated to them and originates in the states and the people of the United States. And so you have to look at
They created it off of our constitutions. It
right,
would not exist without
exactly.
us.
That's why the word source is the word that you have to look beyond the United States Constitution. That word comes from the other constitutions, the constitutions of the 13 states of the Union, right?
Yep.
Okay, so again, the word property, income, service, and source. Know those three words. You absolutely have to know them. And wherever you see a definition that's written by the IRS, you will always see one of those three words being referred to. And that's because it can't be constitutional without those four words, right?
It's sorcery is what it is.
It's sorcery. Yeah, it is. Yeah, absolutely.
And that's what we're dealing with here is spell casting, and it's black magic versus white magic, literally.
Yeah.
In my opinion, this is how I see it. So okay. Let's see here. We're covering a lot of ground here. This is great. And let's see. We're getting some good comments here. Thank you, Chris. Says it's a good topic. So gross income. I think so how do we refute it? So if someone's getting getting taxes taken out of their income, their what do they do to stop it?
Well, first thing you would do is to fill out a new W-4 form and tell your HR manager that from now on, you're exempt, right? So they won't take any money out. And chances are they'll still continue to do it for a couple months, and chances are they may still take out money for Social Security and Medicare. But chances are, if you're going that route, you're also going to fight that at the end of the year. And so at the end of the year, what you'll do is you'll have to fill out their form and refute everything they say. Now, I made a video on this. It's called Honest Tax Returns, Part 1, 4 examples. And watch that video. You'll have the 4 examples on YouTube about how to refute the presumption. That's where it all begins. Okay. So I think that answered your question.
Mm-hmm. And so okay, so go to the employer and deal with that. And how long have you been doing this? And so once you do that, what's the process
Right.
with the IRS?
So what would happen is this, most likely. A lot of times people will get their money back. They'll get a check and they'll say, here's your money, it's returned to you. And that's been happening for over 20 years. And I'm not the first one to do this, by the way. I should actually, and my videos also reference him, but to give credit to Pete Hendrickson. He's been doing this for over 20 years. He's got his own videos. He's got his own channels. He's written a book called Lost Horizons, for example.
Yep.
And
Lost Horizons. If somebody, Gerhard, if you're watching, if you could put his information in the chat, that'd be great.
Yeah. So yeah, definitely put down that Lost Horizons. Go to their losthorizons.com bulletin board, and you'll see how many people are actually getting their money back. Okay. Now, when I first did this, I did this for tax year 2016. And in that tax year, I cashed out on my, I believe it was an education savings account for my kids. And that was before I understand what's going on. So 2016, I said, first of all, you have all this record of income that I allegedly have. Let that go to zero, first thing. And second thing, I thought I owed them actual taxes because I actually was in the army, and so I got wages, so I was supposed to pay them. And so, because of the contributions to a government savings plan, when I pulled out of that government savings plan, I figured I'd give them taxes, right? And that's what I did. I paid them that tax, but I didn't pay the tax on a much more significant portion of actual earnings for that year. Um, about 6 months later, I think I got a check. I got a check from them, and that check returned all my money. In addition, it gave me a few dollars and change for interest. Right.
Mm-hmm.
So that was my first experience. So not only did they not tax any of the money that I earned that year, they gave me the money that I gave to them in error plus interest. So the government does
For what they
operate.
can go back. How many years can you go back? 5?
No, you can go back as many years as you want. And the reason is, let me repeat that. Let me rephrase that. You can go back to as many years as you have documentation for, because you are essentially pointing out a fraud. And frauds do not have a statute of limitations as long as you can prove it. Okay.
Gotcha.
Uh, so you can go back as many years as you want as long as you have the documents.
Okay.
Yeah. Um, and then
Excellent.
over the years, though, the IRS has become aware of these honest tax filings that's been going on, and they will send you kickback letters, and they will try to coerce you or to pressure you into actually or into paying. They'll threaten you with a $5,000 frivolous filings penalty, for example.
They'll say, I guarantee what they do is they send you a letter that says something like, you may be subject to because
Yes,
of some,
yes,
and they'll be very vague about it.
yeah. I think one of our friends here who's on the chat just got one recently. It was kind of a threat letter, but it didn't tell him to do anything. It just kind of laid it out there. It didn't say you have to actually do this or you have to actually do that. It just gave him a bunch of um, coercive and intimidation. It was intimidation basically. And if you're okay with dealing with that, if you're okay with sending them correspondence, what I call civil correspondence, then eventually what they'll do is they'll write you a letter and say, "Hey, we got your letter. Give us 60 days, and we'll talk to you later." And then eventually they'll say, we got your letter. Give us another 60 days," and that'll just keep repeating until they completely forget about it. And then eventually you might even get a letter, as I have done in the past, where it says your tax bills are zero for that year, for example. So that happens as well. The point is, you got to stand your ground. You got to believe in the law and the way that that it's written, and 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 just deal with it. You know, just it's like life. Just deal with it. By the way, there's two
Mhm.
reasons why I think um, the federal income tax is helpful to our society in general. The first is because federal employees get taxed, right? So what would the incentive of someone going to work for the federal government be if everybody knew this fact? It would be less, correct? Because they'll figure we'll
Right.
get a 20% cut on my wages or and government earnings. So why would I work the same job for the government if I can get paid 20% more working privately? So what would happen to the government?
Benefits. They have pretty good benefits and
Right.
all that crap.
So that incentive, the only way the government can do that is if they incentivize them with greater benefits or greater pay, which means the government is now competing in the private sector for employees or work for the workforce. That does two things. One, it makes government workers more qualified and better, and two, because they're getting paid more and everything, and people are the government is kind of on the same level of competition as the private sector. And two, because the governor of the workers cost more, the number of government workers will shrink. So we'll have a shrinking government. We have a very small government. We have a government that the Constitution provided for, not this overreach of a government that we have now, right? So that's why I like the federal income tax. It helps us if properly applied.
If
Yeah.
right. Yes. If it was being, yeah, applied properly. So we got that. And then, so what about this question here? What if they change the definitions of the law in the law?
Yeah. So they may or may not do that occasionally, but the thing is, they can't change those four words that we were talking about: property, income, uh, service, and source. And if you read what we wrote there, it's because of the fact that the government cannot change the definitions that are already in the Constitution, right? And that's because the Constitution is the supreme law of the land, and it is and the meanings of its terms cannot be changed because the government gets their power to change and make legislation based on the Constitution itself. So I'm going to read this now from several Supreme Court decisions. In expounding the Constitution, every word must have its due force and appropriate meaning, and no word is to be regarded as unnecessarily used or needlessly added. Williams versus United States. The Constitution is a written instrument. As such, its meaning does not alter. That which it meant when adopted, it means now. South Carolina versus United States. Words must be read with the gloss of experience of those who framed them, and their words would receive the significance of the experience to which they were addressed, a significance not found in the dictionary. United States versus Rabinovitz. Congress cannot invoke the sovereignty of the people to override their will as declared in the Constitution, and Congress cannot redefine the Constitution, the terms in the Constitution from which it derives its power to legislate in the first place. So they can't just willy nilly change the definitions of the terms in the statutes. I mean, they can change it, but they can't change it um, outside of the boundaries of those four controlling words, right? Remember the
They
four
can
controlling words?
they can obfuscate it
They can
and
obfuscate,
hide
right?
it, right?
Right. Yes.
All right. So let's see here. I think we got a couple questions. Yeah. Why do you think they're arming up? Scotty says. So, and then they have a lot of time, resources, and stolen money to go after people like you and I, but never seem to catch criminal harming kids or anything. Yeah, true. And what about the government printing money and charging the people through taxes? I think that's a different question. I think that's the inflation tax. It's a different type of, but what do you have to say about that, Bear?
Well, again, if we just went by the meaning of the Constitution, right? Money is gold and silver, and if we were on
Correct. Measure weights
money
and measure.
system, right?
How do you
We wouldn't
weigh or
have
measure a fiat debt instrument?
right. So
You can't.
you can't, right? So as long as we can use a honest form of money, whether it be gold backs, gold coins, silver coins, Bitcoin, you know, digital cash, Dash, Litecoin, these things. If you can use those things that are separate from government, then you are not going to be subject to their inflation. In fact, you're going to do much better. I mean, imagine if you lived off of Bitcoin since a few years ago, whatever. You'd be up, right? You'd be up. You wouldn't be. You'd probably have more money than you started with. More money measured
I
in,
think.
yeah, measured
Yeah.
in.
No. I think this would be another a good topic for us to do a little discussion on. Is the what would we call that
Yeah, sure.
type thing, right? And getting out of these debt based instruments with the
Sure.
that they can just print and print and print and print. Um,
It's
Financial.
watered down our purchasing power is what they're doing.
Right. Well, they're stealing. They're literally
Yeah,
taking
they're
money, taking value from the money in your pocket, inflating it. Um,
right.
so I am going to put the Lost Horizons and Pete the description right after we end this. just so everyone knows. Also, I forgot to put in the Lion's Den $5 a month Telegram group. Bear is in there, a few other people. If you guys do want to join that, help support my work and what I do and help me continue this type of stuff, that would be great. You can talk to me and in there as well. It helps to prevent trolls and whatnot. But I will put that, so check back in like a little bit after the stream, and I'll update the description with these other things. And want to get out there to everybody, Bear?
Sure. One last thing. I'm working on an essay. It's called the Guide to Lawful Avoidance of the Tax on Federal Income. I'm writing it up. It should be done probably around Christmas. I'll send you a link, and then that way you guys can just access it, and you'll have everything you need, including the proper forms and everything, so you could just copy and paste,
Excellent.
and you can also share that link with anybody by text, by email, etc. So it'll be easy, and I hope that thing spreads like wildfire. Everybody understands it, and boom, we're done. Like next week, nobody pays their tax on federal income unless they got federal income. See what I mean? I hope that
Right.
happens.
Yeah. We wanted to do this before tax season and get it out there, and 100% send that to me, and I'll do a quick little update and share it on all my different things for sure.
Excellent. So that's all I have, man.
And if anybody, I don't know if anybody has any questions in the chat before we go. We're about to wrap up here, and I do want to thank you so much for your time. And everybody, check the questions with all the hyperlinks, with everything that we've done, that we've talked about. It's all right there. Bear, he's an amazing legal expert and analyst, in my opinion, and thorough. Please support his work. Go to No Duty to Submit YouTube channel. It's linked in there as well. And yeah, give him a subscribe. Watch all his videos. All this stuff that we've talked about is in these very short, informative, easy to share videos explaining taxes, explaining the difference between a firearm and the right to bear arms as well. So thank you so much for your time, Bear. And until the next one, I guess.
Yeah. All right, man. Have a good night. Take care, everybody. Good luck. Yep.
See ya.
Yep.
All right.
Bye now.
Bye-bye. Let's see. How do I end this thing? Here we go. Thank you, Jay. Have a good one, everybody.